Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PA2 Academy webinar for May, complete with special guests who I will introduce momentarily. My name is Stephen Mader. I'm the Global Head of Strategy and Insights here at PA2, and I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we kind of dig into some insights, some overviews, as well as some great discussion between all of us and answering some of your questions. So just a little bit of background. So this is part of the PA2 Academy. We do webinars and newsletters, and we're continuously publishing content, which has all been crowdsourced from many of you. So please stay tuned for more great insights and more great experts that we're going to bring together for all of you, talking about the future of marketplaces, the future of distribution, and how we have to start thinking about integrating 3PLs and marketplace strategy into our go-to-market practices. So this will be recorded. So I know many of you are feverishly writing notes in the background, but don't worry, we'll be recording this. We'll be sending out the slides so you can forward it around internally if you would like a reference back to it later on. Also, if you did not manage to get the webinar from last month, please do ping us as well, and we'll be sure to get that over to you. Okay, so we have about 45 minutes for all of you. There's a couple different sections we want to go through. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what we do at PA2, just for some background. I know many of you are familiar with us, but just in case you're joining us. We are a marketplace analytics company. We have been born out of the need for big brands to manage their presence on marketplace websites like Amazon, Walmart Marketplace, eBay, or Bull.com. We cover about 200 different marketplaces, but we've really been born out of brand protection. That obviously has been incredibly important given the recent COVID crisis. We'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing, but we are also increasingly being asked to do things around distribution diagnostics, category level insights, what's happening with my category, what's happening with my competitors. We, on average, track 1 million products across all of these different marketplaces. We've got about 550 brands that we work with every single day, and we have global coverage of many of those different marketplaces. So what we want to do, some of the feedback we had from April webinar was, as much as you love hearing me talk to you for half an hour, we wanted to bring some additional experts to the conversation. So the overall topic for this section is moving outside of the post-pandemic issues that we're all facing every single day. We want to start thinking, what do we have to do to optimize our media spend now for the next couple of weeks, as well as into 2021. We have to start thinking, okay, from a distribution point of view, how do I ensure that shoppers who actually have the ability to buy our brands and buy our products actually have inventory available to them in a relatively convenient manner to actually get some of those products. So I'm quite pleased to bring all of you Mudit Jaju from Wavemaker. He's the global head of e-commerce. He'll introduce himself in a couple of minutes, as well as Mikko from Relex, coming to us from Finland, who also will be introducing himself in a couple of moments as well. Please, for those of you that are not familiar with the Demio platform, there's a couple differences that you may want to know about. So number one, as much as I'm sure you love seeing our faces at the top of the screen, if you would like to make the slides bigger, there's a little tiny miniaturization button on the top right where you can shrink the video screen, see a bigger picture of the overall presentation. There is chat that will be running, as well as polls on the right-hand side. If you currently do not have that, there should be a little chat button on the top right-hand side that you can move your screen over. Okay. So we'll be looking at 3 specific parts today. We'll be looking at what's the overall broad view, what's been happening in the here and now, as well as what do we think is going to be happening for the next couple of weeks. We'll be doing a bit of situational planning. This is a moderated panel discussion between all of us. We'll be taking your Q&As at the end, but feel free to throw some questions in. We'll see if we can answer them live as well. Okay, so is everything still on fire? Interesting question. So poll number 1. So on the right-hand side, you should be getting a poll coming to you momentarily, which will be asking a very specific question. There you go. So you should be able to answer all of these. These are, of course, anonymous, so no one can see if your numbers are up or down or not. But it's going to be a fun bit of interaction that we can all reference later. So far, we've gotten quite a lot of my business is up, which is great news to see. Now the question is, how do we actually keep up with demand and keep things actually fulfilled, and how do we comp it next year? But as all of you are going through that poll, there's a couple things that we're starting to see, right? So we saw exactly the same thing back in 2008, 2009 during that big recession that we had globally, which is the businesses which are current or which were under pressure, financial pressure, whether that is heavy debt or were struggling from the business model point of view already, they were being squeezed, right? So what we were seeing is retailers that were really struggling already. This was just the final nail in the coffin. And we're already starting to see in this specific crisis, as we all know, given the social distancing and retail, high street shutting orders that we've all started to see, physical retail is starting to struggle. So we've already started to see J.C. Penney, J. Crew, Pier 1 Imports in the U.S., Neiman Marcus, Macy's, all in the process of either filing for bankruptcy, have already filed for bankruptcy, or in the potential starting to liquidate or renegotiate some of their leases, right? So we don't have a really strong view quite yet on who is actually going to end up liquidating their inventory. But the reality is what we're starting to see is these types of recessions, and this one is no different, is really starting to separate the high performance retail, high performance businesses who had a business model set up with a bit of redundancy in it, starting to accelerate, and those that were struggling beforehand starting to continue to struggle, if not cease to exist. We've seen M&S, for example, a fashion retailer, well, fashion and food retailer in the UK, also starting to struggle. They've been struggling for years on their apparel side of the business, but we've just seen in the past couple of weeks that they've taken £145 million markdown on a lot of their seasonal apparel coming out of this crisis, and they have actually deferred much of that, as much as they possibly can, into next year's inventory. So this is something to watch. We'll talk about quite a bit over the next 45 minutes or so, is from a fashion apparel seasonality point of view, what do we expect to happen? Do we expect some of these retailers and brands and fashion houses to just defer the 2020 spring and autumn to 2021, or do we expect that those lines to just completely disappear? And then finally, we have some retailers like Asda, for example, who have just straight up said, you know what, we're not going to actually take any of those orders. We are going to cancel all of our POs. We may give you a bit of cash as a consolation prize, but the reality is we're going to start to see many of these retailers really focusing on what inventory do I need, what assortment do I need, how much of it do I need, do I really need all of this breadth of different lines, and should I instead start thinking about shrinking the overall assortment? So we're starting to see many, many retailers canceling POs. The famous ones have recently been Amazon. And then the question then becomes, which we'll talk about later, if you were planning on building up all of your inventory to meet some of those POs that are coming out from those retailers and the POs stop existing, what happens to all that inventory? Is this a potential challenge around being oversupplied in the market, which will result in either heavy discounting, heavy promo with some of your partners, or will it result in some factories being opportunistic and selling their products that they should not be selling? There's a huge amount of opportunity for fakes and scams. Again, no surprise to many of you on the line at the moment. Just going and Googling, fake toilet paper, fake toilet roll scams will show up tons of these. And in response, we've launched some price gouging dashboards for all of you as well. But the reality is we are starting to see more and more sophistication popping up all of the time around, Chinese entities, foreign players, factories in Bangladesh, all opening up Shopify stores and then running Facebook ads to those Shopify stores, which is much more difficult to police proactively than going to Amazon or eBay directly and saying, this is a rogue item, this is fake, this is copycat, delist it, please. But being proactive about identifying before you need to a Facebook ad, pushing directly to a Shopify store, which may have one or two items listed, is very difficult to do. So we're starting to see many brands starting to put together some triage plans and some proactivity plans around identifying where some of those rogue agents are coming from. So some of our data that we pull is around price gouging, like I was talking about before. So we did a 2019 and 2020 March US versus EU comparison here. And what we saw last year around this same time period was about 8% of overall authorized sellers were accounting for 33% of the price gouging that was happening in the US. Contrast that in this year, we've got 16% of authorized sellers accounted for 36% of the sellout for price gouge sales. And then in very similar information in Europe as well, where we saw a doubling, small base, but a doubling of overall sellers that were acting in price gouging behavior. So this is telling us a couple of things. Number one is, even though a seller may be authorized by you, they may still be acting in behavior which is not necessarily becoming to the relationship that you had originally set out to create. So it is something that you should look a little bit into to ensure that if you have SDAs or third-party agreements set in place, just go back and revisit them from a client compliance point of view to ensure that your authorized sellers are acting in good faith for your brand. And we're seeing many of our media partners explore this as well. We're seeing Google ensure that they're doubling down on ensuring that anyone running ads through their platform has a certain amount of verification. We see Amazon, which set this up last year, but they're starting to accelerate video calls to verify third-party vendors popping up onto their system. These are all, of course, reactionary reactionary from the crisis and a lot of the bad press that some of these media commercial partners have been receiving. But the reality is, from a consumer shopper first point of view, this all makes a lot of sense to ensure that the right ads by verified partners are delivering the right products to you at the right moment in time. So it's good signs that we're seeing. All right, poll number 2. Which term has forever changed? Let's see. We took a quick little poll around the office to figure out, well, which poll has had the largest impact to overall meaning. So the 3 choices are contactless, which to me used to just mean credit card, debit card payments on a POS, but now means something completely different. Is it essential or non-essential? Items, people, retail, is that forever changed? Or priority access, whereas before it may mean a higher tier of the loyalty program that you may be having with the retailer. So you may get to go Christmas shopping 1 hour early, now completely changes everything, right? So it's interesting. It looks like essential, non-essential are the ones that are currently winning at the moment, which will be interesting to see from a planning point of view. Are we going to actually have essential, non-essential categories or definitions of certain brands continue into next year? Or is it something which is just a bit of a short-term trend, which is only for the here and now? Okay. One of the other things that we've started to see is a complete shift in the way that we define convenience, right? So we have forever been defining convenience as proximity-based retail. I can pop into a store on my way home from work, pop into the store on my way home from school, pick up a couple of things and then pop back out again. So this could be small box retailing, convenience stores, petrol stations, but increasingly from a digital point of view, convenience just means how fast can you get me the product. It's all about speed, right? So there's been quite a lot of discussion around the analyst community and around media recently about how Uber and Deliveroo and Instacart are all enabling retailers to unlock sources of inventory. So if I have inventory which may not have a last mile distribution availability, all of a sudden now Deliveroo can come and pick up some of those items for you, which is great, right? But there's the question around, well, who still actually owns that brand consumer or shopper experience? In this case, we've got me looking at, in the UK, this is around London, digging into one of the symbols group. I think this was a Londis, I believe. All of a sudden looking in and seeing, okay, well, I can get a party deal 1, which has been uploaded by a very entrepreneurial store manager, where I can get a 1 liter bottle of Smirnoff, a liter of Glens, a bottle of Coke, a bottle of tonic water, a couple mixers, and some ice for 70 pounds, about $100 or so, which may not be the most amazing value in the world, but from a speed to shopper convenience point of view, there's a big question there, right? What exactly is the economics of getting some of these items actually to that shopper as close as possible, as fast as possible? Is this trend going to continue in every single innovation iteration that we've seen? Or is it, we're going to go back to the way it was 6 months ago? We're of the opinion, I'm of the opinion, that for shoppers who were already highly penetrated for buying groceries online, not a significant amount of change. But for those that were already under-penetrated, and it's going to be a massive opportunity. So it's those who are potentially more rural and suburban, who may not have had access before. I think that's going to continue, as well as potentially some older demographics, older shoppers who may not have felt comfortable buying groceries online. That's going to continue, as well as a big opportunity for those pure play grocers. And then finally, this is just hot off the presses, some great data from McKinsey all around speed of decision making and how fast businesses are needing to iterate in this new post-pandemic, post-COVID world, right? We're all starting to think about, well, okay, we've got our business models and we've got our entire business plan, our go-to-market plan that we've built, back in September for the following year. And what they've done is look through every single piece of how data and how talent and how iterations around objectives are all evolving over time, given the need to go faster. Because if all you're doing is building your portfolio and category plan once a year, maybe once every 6 months, and all of a sudden this big impact and shock to demand all of a sudden happens, are you moving fast enough, and do you have the muscle memory built around iterating really, really quickly, really big decisions in the business? So what we've started to see, and what McKinsey has done a really good job of of highlighting, is the fact that almost everything now is moving away from annual business planning into at least quarterly, if not monthly cadence around all kinds of go-to-market decisions, whether that is channel decisions, whether that is portfolio decisions, whether that is M&A decisions, whether that is shifting talent pools around to overperforming versus underperforming brands or channels. There may not actually be a change, but it's the process and the muscle memory that you're building to enable those decisions to happen faster than before. Okay. Potentially one consumption occasion, which is from my focus group of one, which is me. For my anniversary, we were, of course, locked in, as everybody else was. But my wife really, really, really wanted some ice cream for our anniversary. So I am the sucker that somehow managed to actually spend £9 each on a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So there is someone that will be willing to spend that much money. Very special occasion. I don't necessarily know if that would be my always-on top-up opportunity. Okay, that's it for me for now. I'm going to hand it over to Mudit to talk about what he's hearing at Wavemaker.
Cool. Thank you, Steve. Just to introduce myself, moving quickly. I head up the global e-commerce practice at Wavemaker. Wavemaker is part of Group M and WPP and is one of the 4 sort of main media agencies within the WPP group. Within the e-com practice that I head up, we essentially bring together retail and media expertise, and it makes us kind of, feel very excited to be part of all of these conversations that we're having today around retail and portfolio and distribution, but also looking at the consumer and kind of how you build up your brand equity so that when they are in that moment of choice, whether they're on the digital or physical aisle, they're choosing your product and clicking on your website and looking at your pages, etc. These are just some of the brands we work with. I guess what makes us unique and interesting in some ways is that we work with both manufacturer brands as well as retailer brands. So we hear quite a few different things about kind of what's going on with some of the clients, some of the brands that are actually buyers of products and some that are sellers. So and we work with all of these in kind of around, I think we're in 90 countries now or something to that effect. We break the way that we think about e-com into three components: retail planning, which is very much around sort of the strategy, your assortment planning, what your channel strategy is, so on and so forth. Your front end, obviously, as more and more people are buying online in new ways and buying new categories online, making sure you have the right content at the point of sale. So, your brand store, your PDPs, your front end UX for your website, etc. Is the other part of it. And then the bulk of the work that we do is around retail amplification, which is in the area of media, which is probably core to our offering. So how do you, in these very, very crowded environments, I mean, that's read something like 10 million new products get listed on Amazon every single day. How do you make sure your product stands out? So when somebody's searching for, generic category term, how do you make sure your product is the one that they're that is showing up and that they're clicking on? Very germane, I guess, to the current environment, I thought I'd just include some of these things in terms of what's going on from a media standpoint. These are all questions I've been asked in the last couple of months. So I had one client that sponsored a major sporting event which got cancelled, and they suddenly were stuck with millions and millions of dollars that were going to be unspent. Obviously, some of that went right back to the bottom line. But they actually were like, e-commerce has always been a very small portion of what we do. It was a client in a food category. And they said, e-commerce has always been quite limited, but is this an opportunity for us to kind of really break through and redefine the way that this category is perceived online? And so it was, essentially we took all of their sponsorships money, which we were going to invest in kind of out of home and events and so on, and moved it into e-com media. Another one that I'm sure many of you would have come across is restrictions on media. So I think a lot of places I saw online were talking about, well, you can just spend your money out of this problem. You can just double whatever you're spending on Amazon advertising or triple what you're spending on Walmart Media Group. It's not quite that simple, because on the one hand, obviously there can be supply issues. So if you're out of stock, for example, your ad will not render. And on the other hand, in some cases, the platforms actually chose to restrict advertising. So Walmart is a good example. So is Tesco, who actually did not allow brands in essential categories, did not allow advertising on essential categories. So you suddenly went from this like very hard performance focus to kind of the opposite. So if you can't run a search campaign on Walmart and Amazon, what do you do with that fund? What is the best way to invest that? And that move means you kind of move towards much more of a priming kind of equity building messaging. Another one that was really good was this was a retailer client who said, our store's not going to open up. We're seeing e-com growing, but actually we know it's never going to catch up to replace our offline business. But what can we do to do more of this? And this was very occasion specific category. It was actually a luxury brand. And so their focus very much was around, how do we get more qualified traffic? How do we drive up AOV? Because we're going to make up the sales on AOV rather than on getting more people in through the sort of quote unquote the front door. And then there's also stuff like everything went pear-shaped. We have supply issues. We had one client who had a production facility in northern Italy, and that was not a very good place to be. So everything's gone pear-shaped. What do we do? And actually, this is a really good time to really think about the entirety of the business. There's always a backlog of projects that don't get done because it does not affect immediately next week's or next quarter's sales target. Website tagging, SEO optimization, cleanup of content, all of these things that you kind of put aside because you've got to kind of make next week's numbers. This is a really great time to focus on all of these. So actually for one client, we kind of went back and said, listen, we've been talking about fixing the website for years. Let's do that now, because while the website is not transactional and it's quote unquote down, if something breaks, it's not going to have the worst impact ever. So actually we've been able to get that like long back burner list whittled down in quite a big way. So I think the main thing, and the reason why I wanted to point out those 4 examples, is because flexibility is incredibly important. I think that in media, we are very, very comfortable with chopping and changing as needed. I mean, media plans change from morning to evening, and that agility is very, very necessary. And while I think we've known that and had that behavior for in-channel, so in-channel you've optimized search, in-channel you've optimized your TV outlay or whatever, we've never been in the situation before where you take a sports sponsorship and turn it into search ads. That's unusual. But it's something that I think we're going to have to get more comfortable with. And in the way that brands would think of brand, performance, and e-com media in separate buckets, I really do believe that the brands that are going to win are the ones that can operate across all three seamlessly. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's good, coming back to that McKinsey study about, it doesn't necessarily matter what decisions you actually make. It's just how fast you can actually review and input the data into your business process. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. All right. I'm going to now hand it over to Miko. You're muted.
Maybe hear me also, not only see lips. Okay. Sorry about that. Hey, thanks, Steven. Pleasure to be here. I'm Mikko Kärkkäinen. That's a very Finnish name. As said, I come from a company named Relex. I've personally been kind of looking at retail process and retail supply chain optimization, working on it for 23 years, first in academia and then now 15 years at Relex. So if we think of Relex as a company, it's been interesting time during this crisis. So we work with retailers, both pure play retailers like Cdiscount, which is the second biggest e-com player in France after Amazon, and as well as plenty of physical bricks and mortar retail and omnichannel retailers, with over 250 customers in 22 different countries we operate with. That's probably enough of background, but basically do demand forecasting, have been doing quite a lot of demand analytics as well as optimizing the stock and capacity deployment. So as a background for the brief introduction, so how we at Relex see things, that there's actually been a tsunami or big tidal wave of change, which was the acute epidemic, and now most of the retailers, be those in omnichannel or physical retailer, are riding quite choppy waters or lots of unrest in the next 12 to 18 months before there's a cure or herd vaccine or herd immunity or any selection. And we found a couple of things related to, as most of you I've skimmed through the attendees are from the vendor side that have noticed that have impacted also retailers quite a lot on different type of channels kind of picking up, and some stores being closed and so on, and happy to answer any questions later on, because I do believe that from what we've been working with the customers, we have quite good perspective on what retailers are doing and why, and what can be the likely counters on that. If we think of managing through the crisis, what the most sensible retail companies are actually doing currently are still enforcing and building more transparency to their supply chain, so that they can have better control on what stock they have where and how do they do. And I would believe that most of retail customers or retailers will also be doing what we call in supply chain postponement strategies or aggregation strategies. So they try to retain the possibility of deploying stock to whatever channels possible, and actually pulling back from the final allocation decision or pulling back of the stock, so that they kind of minimize the need of markdowns and maximize the opportunity or the mobility of the stock to actually offer it where there's the best sales opportunity. For demand forecasting and demand estimation, there's more uncertainty than at least ever in the 23 years I've been looking at supply chains this far, so it's quite high. Most of the issues related to anyone from vendor side is, of course, of course, on the stock and orders from the retailers, but what the retailers also look, especially in the essential retail, grocery, health and beauty, and so on, how to manage the general capacity of both online delivery, in-store picking, DCs picking, as well as normal distribution and distribution center resources, and forecasting and planning those well. Of course, as said, now it's time for choppy waters, but there's been lots of mega change happening in retail. I think e-com marketplaces are a big part of that. Convenience, be that then kind of denoting the old term or new term with the urbanization, has been a big thing also. People are kind of voting for the easiest alternative, and there's been, from my viewpoint, philosophically the kind of great dilemma of huge talk about sustainability and then the success of Zalando that actually burns 70% of returned goods and so on, and kind of how do they fit, because some of the e-com trends are not most sustainable, but they are what the consumers want, and actually what we also as supply chain optimization vendor want to be doing is providing actually more cost effective, less wasteful ways of bringing that convenience to consumers. I think on how we see actually retail and what are the two big dimensions, I would see that the best retailers do now. One is focusing on efficiency as convenience drive grows, as material flows go thinner, it's harder to be profitable. So basically, there's a drive for cost effectiveness, and in many ways it's automating more and more of the small decisions, be those inventory deployments, be those orders, be those demand forecasts, allocating people, doing labor shifts, and doing those every bit a bit better, and growing kind of more autonomous and cost effective on that. And then the other important thing is remaining agile on changing your operations as needed, as world is more uncertain than before. It actually was already last year, but didn't see this epidemic or pandemic coming anyhow. So it's new level. And what we then call is actually the era of living retail, where you both need to combine as frictionless operations as possible to lots of change driven in by the surroundings. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mikko. And I love this idea around like blending art and science around everything that we do at retail, right? It just goes far to essentially say that, well, yes, increasingly things are getting automated and algorithmic. The reality is we need to be able to automate the things that don't actually add any value, and ensure that all of those people that are the creative juice and creative muscle behind so many great brands are freed up time to actually go off and do what they love to do, which is inspire and delight their end consumers and ultimately drive brand growth. So thanks for that.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I think if we think of, for example, there was earlier mention on inventory deployment or POs, or where to deploy the inventory. When, for example, coming to the pandemic crisis, in some ways, repetitive things are easier to automate, even AI. But when we come to things, when you have scarcity of stock, for example, or somebody is forging your toilet paper and so on, there are many intricacies and decisions, and it's impossible to automate something that actually hits you like a rocket.
Yeah, it's amazing. So there's actually a question from Sean that just came through around understanding how Amazon is currently trying to figure out their demand forecasting, right? He's essentially saying, I'm curious if anyone else has heard this on the panel or even in the chat as well. Are you feeling like they're getting more accurate or less accurate? Basically, Mikko, as soon as what you have said just now, it would assume that they're going to be less accurate because their entire 20 years of algorithmic precision around, trying to optimize that 2 weeks on hand availability has completely blown up when all of a sudden their 20 years of models around demand and supply is completely blown up. So has anyone had any recent understanding from the brand point of view or the client point of view about what you're seeing at Amazon's forecasting? Mooted, have you seen anything from your clients at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's total chaos.
Yeah.
Is the honest answer. I have two clients, one that makes large office equipment, and the other one that makes very large DIY equipment. Now, obviously, DIY is having a moment like no other, but it is a physically very large product, which just takes up a lot of space in the warehouse. And so we've noticed that physical size has become a factor in a way that it wasn't before. I know that Amazon had stopped ships on non-essential categories and so on, but I would never have thought that physical size would end up being as big of a factor. And the thing is that there's so many of these things that it is total chaos is the honest answer.
Yeah, from a non-Amazon point of view, Miko, have you seen a lot of the, I'll say, demand planning accuracy of some of your clients, been thrown into chaos a bit?
Yeah, I think it's good to kind of separate two things. One is demand planning, and one is sales forecasting and sales planning. And in some stage, it might be that if you're constrained on your supply, be that the supply of the product or be that the physical space, and you actually are allocating that kind of scarce resource, you might have 100% planning accuracy on the sales. And if you have, for example, 100 pieces of warehouse units or stock, and you didn't demand is over 200, you know that we can sell 100. And that's probably happening with Amazon with a huge uptake of demand. They can be going out of warehouse space and actually refusing to buy some of the more bulky products. Many of our customers have, for example, kicked several customers out of their warehouse to direct delivery just to accommodate and get enough space for the increased demand on the online channels.
Yeah, I've seen that from the last mile as well, where we've seen some online grocers in a couple of markets refuse to deliver large, bulky, or heavyweight products as well to maintain additional space on the vans as well.
Yeah, I think it's related to restricting the assortment or region.
Absolutely. So that's gonna be a big topic we'll talk about in about 10 minutes or so, is around where do we think this is finally going to be an inflection point around balancing breadth of assortment and profitability of online and online grocery in particular, because from an assortment and, Mood said 10 million new items are getting listed on Amazon. Is this finally the point where we start constricting overall availability of new assortment, new products in NPD to focus more on efficiency and actually driving value out of all the inventory that's actually sitting on hand? But we'll talk about that in a moment. Moving into a bit of a case study around a mock rescue plane situation analysis. Question here around Amazon in particular. So again, this is all anonymous at the moment. Where I'll share this poll now. Questions around where do we see the Amazon investment going, right? Inside your business. So I've heard a couple of different things. One is, this is, again, the nail in the coffin, that we will no longer be working with Amazon. They are causing chaos all over the place, and therefore we're going to use this time to reevaluate the role that Amazon plays in our overall route to market in a way that we want to interact with our end brand or our end consumers. And this is going to be it. I've seen the exact opposite, which is many brands who were potentially dipping their toe into the water of Amazon finally coming back and saying, we have to be there. There's no way we can't be there. There is so much eyeballs, so many decisions being made. Our competitors are there. We have to ensure that we are growing, but growing in a profitable way with Amazon. And then some e-commerce directors have no idea what direction to take because their finance people, their commercial people, their legal people, or their GM are all pointing in different directions. And they're just trying to keep the lights on, keeping products actually available. Cool. We'll let that poll run, and then we'll get into the case study. So I want everyone to kind of, close their eyes. Remember the good times of about 4 months ago, where you could walk into any large hypermarket and see mountains and mountains of toilet paper and kitchen towel. Remember when the numbers actually made sense. Remember when we could do accurate forecasting, and remember when we were struggling to get a headcount or two approved to invest into our digital commerce team. And now all of a sudden we're starting to think about, okay, 2020 has happened. What exactly is going on? So we decided to make a little bit of a case study here around with a 1P with Amazon as well as a D2C brand. And this is on average what we've been hearing across many of our different brand partners that we work with around the world. So this tends to be a good timeline. So number one, China goes dark. A lot of your supply chain actually goes into lockdown. You can no longer, your factories have all been shut down. You may have 2 or maybe 3 months of inventory, either already in motion, already on ships, or already in local market warehouses. Most of your retailers have 8 weeks of inventory on hand, but Amazon, because they are so focused on cash flow, only has 2 weeks of inventory on hand. Your physical stores for your direct-to-consumer brand are shut. Government has mandated that they're shut because it's non-essential, and your EDCs go dark, at least for a while, either because you cannot put health and safety measures in place or because you're taking the brand and culture stance that we are not going to risk any of our actual warehouse employees. Your Amazon inventory sells out immediately because, of course, you only had 2 weeks of inventory on hand, but they also stopped issuing POs because you're deemed non-essential. You made the tough call to go on allocation. As Miko was saying, with essential retailers, you only have 2 to 3 months of inventory in the market. So what exactly do you do? Who do you give the money to, or who do you give the inventory to? Do you give it to your strategic retailers, your strategic partners like a Walmart or a Tesco or a Carrefour or a Kroger? Or do you give it, spread it more evenly across all of the different retailers? Or do you allocate some of it to Amazon and over-index your allocation to Amazon, considering that's where the bulk of potential new recruitment and new shoppers actually are? The challenge is many of these retailers, they want massive, massive, massive orders, but only have 1 or 2 items. They don't want the full breadth. They don't want any of that new stuff. They don't want any of the 2020 portfolio. They want the core range, generally available 1 or 2 items, and they want trucks and pallets full of it. All of your competitive above the line out of home money gets dumped into retail media, whether that's your business or all of your category competitors. Money gets dumped into retail media, driving costs way high. You're trying to keep pace with spend and shipments, but your essential ASINs keep getting turned off by Amazon because they can't make up their mind if you're an essential or non-essential category, or they've been taken over by a 3P and it's gone absolutely crazy. And then you start getting a little bit of glimpses of hope. You're starting to see some POs getting reissued from Amazon. Your Chinese factories, your Asian factories are opening up again. But then there's the question of, well, what do we actually do when these companies go full bore and actually end up starting to potentially flood the market? Okay. So we'll stop there. I don't want to give anyone panic attacks. So what we'll do now is we'll go into a bit of a panel discussion around what do we actually do now, right? So from a demand point of view, this is the here and now, stopping the sinking ship. What do we do to actually start generating demand? Or do we throw that out the window and only start thinking about converting demand that already exists in the market where inventory actually sits? I'll go to Moot it first, if that's okay.
Well, first of all, fire the person that said you should turn off all above the line media. I think that's a big step one. I think that, look, retail media is very important at what it does, and that is at that sort of point of sale right before conversion. But none of it is going to happen if you've turned off all. Your brand has to be mentally available first before it's physically or digitally available in a retail environment. So when you are searching for, I don't know, I mean, and none of these are my clients, so full disclosure. When you're searching for cleaning supplies and Lysol comes up, the person has to know what Lysol is to click on that ad. or have some sort of proclivity towards lifestyle to click on it. So I think that to generate demand, you do have to continue to be on air and be mentally available. It is also a great time to get excellent media pricing. So TV advertising has never been cheaper. And actually, if you have the ability to do some investment there, there are deals to be had. So I think that there's actually, on retail media, excellent hygiene. You absolutely have to have that. There's no denying it, but you should be looking at other forms of media as well. Obviously, out of home is a bad idea, but whether that is digital content integration or whether that is TV, it is certainly worth relooking at that. I also think that there's something around, being very relevant to the current scenario. So we've seen some examples of brands moving things around. I think one example that I really liked was Heinz, that set up a direct-to-consumer website. Very, very basic. It's not going to win 1,000 design awards, but they were selling sort of a basic pack of 16 tins of their products. Now, that website's not going to make them millions and millions of dollars either, but it signals mental availability. And I thought that in addition to it being a new channel for Heinz, it was also a way in which they generated some PR around it. So I do think that it is more important than ever to be communicating in an appropriate way that makes sense. But I think that relying solely on retailer media to generate demand is a terrible idea.
Do you think the brands that had a direct 1P access to their end consumer, like those that have their own direct consumer websites, were better positioned to capitalize on this really quickly?
Yes and no. I mean, I think what Heinz proved was that you can have a DTC site up in 3 weeks. So having or not having a DTC site is almost an irrelevant thing, because if you really needed one and the organization swam in one direction, you could have one. I think that there are some channels and cases where it made sense, and sometimes it didn't. I think that it was asking someone to go through a lot of chains of understanding if you did not already have like a really good one to capitalize on. So I do think that there were so many other things going on that having a DTC site or not having a DTC site was, it's kind of didn't really make a difference. Now, certainly having a DTC site is great because it gives you options. Because if your factory in China or if Amazon's not being reliable with forecasting or whatever it is, with your DTC site, you can do whatever you want, right? You can create bundles in new ways without having to convince an Amazon buyer or a vendor manager that bundle needs to exist, or Tesco, forget even trying to get a meeting with the Tesco buyer. But I think that those are the advantages of having your DTC site. I think there are some that were able to use it to kind of tell their story in a better way as well. But I don't think DTC is a silver bullet, but it is a powerful tool in your arsenal.
Awesome. Mikko, have you seen any changes to the way that some of your retail partners are thinking through the signals that they're using to identify where demand's coming from?
Yeah, I think I think if I was selling to retailers, where I invest quite a lot is actually additional research on in which of the categories or which sectors of retail there's bottled up demand. For example, if we look at openings in DIY or non-essential stores in Italy, our customers, they had like 60% year-on-year lifts in the first weekend. So there's lots of consumers who were fed up not being able to shop and wanting to take that on. And depending on which channels you try to sell, that now is the time that many of the retail buyers actually don't know, category managers, what's happening. And if you have an information edge on the role of the category and can kind of lift it up and tell how to take it further, how to take advantage, that can be of advantage, and you can get a bit more space on that. If we look at our customers, some of the big things, and depends on what kind of data they have. Now there was the possibility of having the mobility data from Google for all coordinates, and it's been possible to look at what's the traffic within each of the store areas and actually model the impact of that to demand and walk through modeling. And any of the retailers that have possibilities of those can actually then optimize both on, well, not in-store media, but front of store media, and how to capture demand in and which of the locations actually will pick up most of the demand within the opening, because it's not universal on how there's huge difference between physical retail outlets which have been winning and which have been losing.
Awesome. For kind of building on that a bit, how can we start thinking about new routes to consumer, right? So if there is a bit of demand, whether it is, you know, a DIY store opening up really quickly and potentially using that as an opportunity for new sources of growth, how can this hypothetical company start thinking about new routes to consumer? What should they be using to their advantage to flex to that? A good example is, you know, those companies that at least we work with who previously have not necessarily explored eBay are now looking at using their strategic 3PLs, their authorized distributors, to flex into eBay, because they've realized that those operations are still fully functional, and that's a new potential route to market. Mudit, have you seen any of your brands being a little bit braver in where they're potentially putting their products?
I don't think anybody's pulled it off just yet, but I think Facebook and Shopify become more important. I mean, not just because of the announcements that they've made in the last week, but I think Facebook and Shopify become very important. I think Instacart is the other one in the US that we're seeing more and more people use as a sort of storefront. I think that the role of the gateway platforms becomes really interesting, because I think previously it was manufacturer and retailer. But I think that the gateway platforms, and there's a lot of different ways to think about the gateway platform, right? Google Shopping is a gateway platform. Shopify is a gateway platform. Facebook's a gateway platform. So is Instacart. So is Deliveroo. And I think that there's a lot of interesting things that are happening there. I think a lot of the British supermarkets went on to Deliveroo in a way that they never had before. And I think that kind of way of thinking about it is actually pretty clever. So I think that you do those things where there's a chance for you to amplify, because you don't have the time for the algorithm to learn and get good. So, you know, even if you do have the ability to add some additional products to your lines at Boots or whatever, it's the Boots algorithm the engine doesn't have enough time to learn that actually now this company that used to make hand soap now also makes body wash. But with eBay or with Shopify or Facebook or whatever, or Google, you have the ability to strategically invest for a few days to push yourself to the top of the rankings. And that gives them what I would call calibrating data to any of these algorithms. And I think that would be a good test is, if this becomes the most important storefront for me, can I throw money at the problem to beat it in the short term for just a few days to go to the top and see what that kind of decay effect looks like, rather than kind of like achieve a listing and then hope for the best. I think that's a terrible plan.
So I have two follow-up questions then. So one of the challenges that marketplaces have historically had within really big manufacturers is who actually owns it. Is it a commercial partner, because that's where purchases are made, transactions are made, or is it a media partner? Now, obviously, the answer is both, right? But from a who actually owns it as a single point of contact, have you seen? Is it a media play? Is it a marketing play? Is it a commercial play? But does it matter?
I think that I was talking to one of my clients who's a beauty business. They make beauty products, and we kind of were joking and said, you have to change from being a beauty brand that dabbles into e-commerce, but you have to start thinking of yourself as an e-commerce business that is vertically integrated and does their own manufacturing. And that is a very different way of thinking about it. I think that there's a lot of places that have built these centers of excellence, and that's not without value. But I think that the idea that you can hire 3 people and then e-com becomes their problem and they're going to solve it, I mean, it's ridiculous. I think that there has to be a cross-functional approach to this. The marketing people are never going to be experts in supply chain. The supply chain people are not really going to be experts in marketing, but they need to know enough that they can interface with each other effectively. That's actually one of the most surprising work streams I found myself in, is running Media 101 for supply chain people.
Yeah, I remember in a past life running Amazon 101 for supply chain people, even running social media for supply chain people as a demand signal, but that was 10,
I think
12
we have
years
to
ago.
do less like us and them.
Yeah.
We like work better together.
That's exactly it. Have you actually seen, from a digital commerce point of view, any of these steering committees or centers of excellence have supply chain business partners involved?
Yes, all the good ones have.
Yeah.
All the good ones have. All the terrible ones don't. I think the terrible ones get disbanded in about a year. But the ones that have made a meaningful step change have. I mean, and candidly, we've gone into those sessions and been very senior people have said, listen, we know what we know. I don't understand what a bid management platform is. I don't really understand what front-end content is and how you use a bot to produce front-end content. So it's required that like level of being comfortable and asking those questions, which I'm more than happy to get stuck in on.
I think it's really interesting conundrum, right? Because digital commerce just in general is not necessarily how do I grow with Amazon, how do I grow with digital commerce channels, but increasingly what we're finding are the heads of e-commerce in many of our the big brands are also the ones that are having to put out fire and bring the rest of the organization along, because they're the ones that are kind of driving forward and breaking legacy business models.
When it's your only growth area, it's kind of, head of e-commerce is kind of an important thing, and especially for the businesses where e-commerce has gone from being 7% of their business to 30% of their business. In some cases, 100% of their business, it suddenly is brought into sharp focus. That you can't have one person responsible for something that enormous. It's got to be an organizational responsibility.
Absolutely. So we've got three or 4 minutes left. I want to make sure that everyone who's interested in asking questions can ask some questions in the chat. And in the meanwhile, we'll keep going. So we brought up the question of NPD before, right? And around breadth of assortment. Do we feel, and this is a question for Miko and then for Mudit, do we feel like we are going to see an acceleration of retailers stopping the line extensions and proliferation of SKUs, and we're going to go back into where we saw in 2009, 2010 of SKU rationalization?
What I believe that actually the retailers that will do best, they actually will make themselves relevant for the consumer. And that means that in store-based brick and mortar retail, the ranges are curated, that you actually know that if I'm going to that kind of, I identify myself with that retailer, the offering is relevant for you and you have a rational amount of choice. That could be 3 to 7 pieces, not over much. I think on e-com platforms that can be done by curating the choices per customer, per consumer based on the consumer level data and learning about them. So it's a bit different if we think of the supply chain impacts, but I do believe that the ones that succeed will make less very relevant offering per consumer type that they face.
So less of a spray and pray approach to portfolio planning. Yeah. Mudit, what are you saying?
I think it is going to, in the short to medium term, I think it is going to be down. But that's also because consumers are turning to things that they're familiar with. I think it's a very uncomfortable time right now for us as people, as consumers. So I do think that the brands, we're gonna buy the brands we know and love, and things that are unfamiliar it's just not something consumers are looking for right now, I think. So I do think that there's some of that's going to happen. I also think it's going to be driven to some extent by the size of digital commerce in your category and what the mix of it is, right? So if you're actually becoming very heavily e-com driven category, there's going to be more of it because you have an infinite shelf. But if you are in a category that is much more still traditional, bricks and mortar based, it's probably going to be less so because people are going back to the things that they are familiar with. What I found very interesting at the very early days of the crisis when we were all panic buying is walking around the grocery store and seeing what had not sold out. And it wasn't.
It's all the vegan stuff.
It was sold out. All the name brand toilet paper was sold out. Berea pasta was sold out. It was like the random pasta from southern Spain that nobody had ever heard of that was still there. So I think that there is huge power in kind of going, I know what Berea is. I know it's not going to give me food poisoning, so I'm going to go with that. I have to be in and out of this store as quickly as possible. So I'm going to go with the pasta brand that I recognize.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much. We are now at the end of our time together, so I'll let Mudit have the final word there. Those of you that have attended, thank you very much for taking the time out of your afternoon and morning to have a conversation with us. You will be getting a recording emailed to you tomorrow morning. And until then, have an absolutely fantastic day, and we'll talk to you for the next webinar. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.